This is a review of how to find the derivative of sin x by definition. We're going to start with some stuff that you need to know. You need to know a couple special trig limits. The limit as x approaches 0 of sin x over x equals 1. And the limit as x approaches 0 of 1 minus cosine x over x equals 0. We've talked about these in class, and you're going to keep seeing them throughout the year. The second thing that you need to know, I guess it's really the third, is that sum identity, the sine of the sum of two angles, equals the sine of the first times the cosine of the second, plus the cosine of the first times the sine of the second. We're going to start off with a definition of a derivative. That's the limit as h approaches 0 of f of x plus h minus f of x. And in this case, we're going to use f of x equals sine x, and that'll make our f of x plus h. Sine of x. The nice thing about this is I can move things over as I write. Sine of x plus h. Okay, so setting this up. So we've got the limit as h approaches 0 of sine of x plus h minus sine x all over h. First thing we're going to do is use our trig identity of sine of the sum of two angles. And we end up with the limit as h approaches 0 of sine x cosine h plus cosine x sine h, that's that part, minus sine x all over h. Okay, we're going to continue with this. I'm going to rearrange my numerator to group my two terms of the sine x next to each other. And get the limit as h approaches 0 of, let's go negative sine x plus sine x cosine h plus cosine x sine h all over h.
So the base word is scrap.
The next thing I'm going to do is factor out a negative sine of x. So I've got the limit as h approaches 0. Factoring out negative sine of x, I get negative sine x. If I factor a negative sine x out of negative sine x, I get 1. If I factor a negative sine x out of sine x cosine h, I get minus cosine h. Alright. And then plus cosine x sine h. That's all over h. From here, we're going to break up our fractions somewhat and set up as the sum of two limits. We're going to go with the limit as h approaches 0, negative sine x times 1 minus cosine h all over h plus the limit as h approaches 0 of cosine x sine h over h. There are a couple cool things that happen here. The first is I have one of my special trig limits. The limit as h approaches 0 of 1 minus cosine h over h. That's going to turn into a big 0. And when multiplied times The limit as h approaches 0, negative sine x. That whole first term is going to go away. The second cool thing is I have my limit as h approaches 0 of sine h over h. That's my other special trig limit. That one's going to equal 1. So here we've got 1 for the sine h over h. I've got cosine x times 1. The derivative of sine of x is cosine of x.